get started on the next presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce Lauren Koff, and she will be speaking about privilege, entitlement, and honesty.
Hi, everybody. So the presentation today I did as my thesis project, and then also as a group project with Daniel Lopez, Melanie Thompson, and Brian Pennington, with Dr. Lanning helping us along. So our thesis, specifically our hypotheses, the main objective, which was the topic of my thesis, was to look at the association between privilege and honesty or unethical behavior. Secondary, we wanted to look at the relationship of personality and its relationship either mediating between privilege and cheating or just the direct relationship between personality and cheating. So we did this work to further our knowledge on perceptions of social justice and mechanisms underlying unethical behavior. So to start, I've got to be really brief about the literature review, but to give you a few points that I think really emphasize what I consider to be white privilege here in America today. People, to start with just the drug war, people across all races use drugs at very similar rates. However, studies have shown, like one out of New Jersey, white individuals were actually 2 times as likely as blacks to be found with illegal drugs or contraband in their car, and 5 times as likely as Latinos. Now, this same study showed that only 15% of all the drivers on the turnpike were minorities, yet 42% of all stops and 73% of all arrests were of African Americans. This is all despite the fact that blacks and whites violate traffic laws at almost the exact same rate. Another statistic for you, looking at the incarceration rates, men between the ages of 20 to 34 are incarcerated at a rate of 1 out of 30. That figure rises to 1 in 9 for African American men, a Pew 2008 study found. And the Sentencing Project of 2009 found that Latinos were incarcerated at a rate almost twice that of their white counterparts. Lastly, having to do with law enforcement, African Americans, a ProPublica 2014 study found, are 21 times more likely to be shot dead by police than their white counterparts. This is, of course, a very incomplete national data because there is no national database shooting for police, no national database for police shootings. Florida, for example, hasn't reported since 1997. If you look at the chart there in the bottom, this was a study the ACLU did examining the school-to-prison pipeline. They found an interesting trend in disciplinary actions between 2004 and 2012. You can see black students were actually given out-of-school suspensions at a rate of 1 out of every 6 students, or 17%, while white students receiving the same treatment was only 1 in 16, or 6.25%. Now, to talk briefly about class privilege, and please ask me more questions about class privilege afterwards since I just don't have time. But some quick statistics. A report from 2000 found that blacks were actually more than 6 times as likely as whites to go to jail for identical crimes. 2/3 of the people in our jail system report annual incomes under $12,000 prior to arrest. So then to touch on in-group privilege, there's this idea of in-group favoritism fostering discrimination. Greenwald and Pettigrew, 2014, found that favoritism of one's own group can really have serious consequences on the system as a whole when one race dominates the population as white Americans do. Even if the majority of Americans as a whole would like to improve equality across races, over the past half-century, white Americans have actually consistently opposed financial assistance, social services, and affirmative action to minorities. On the contrary, though, during the 2012 elections, the majority of white Americans actually supported tax laws that assisted only very wealthy individuals. If you look at a study from PIF 2012, he found that subjective and objective measures of socioeconomic status are predictive of cheating. And lastly, with class privilege, as you can see, the top chart there shows African American individuals have had to and continue to deal with the highest rates of poverty, while non-Hispanic whites have the lowest rates. So to briefly talk to you about the different personality variables we assessed, we looked at narcissism, entitlement, and social dominance orientation. So narcissism, PIF 2014 did a study with upper class individuals and all individuals of different classes found specifically that upper class individuals are more likely to be narcissistic and entitled. Along those same lines, Williams, Nathans, and Paulus, 2010, linked narcissism with cheating. So the two types of narcissism, there's grandiose narcissism and vulnerable. Grandiose is more domineering, intrusive. An example question is, sacrificing for others makes me a better person. Vulnerable narcissism is more like you're overcompensating for shame or low self-esteem. So an example question, I need others to acknowledge me. Moving on to entitlement. There's two types of entitlement, and Piffen-Krause, 2012, found that entitlement predicts cheating. Exploitive entitlement is more linked with neuroticism, psychopathy. An example question is, I shouldn't have to work harder than others to get what I deserve. Non-exploitative entitlement is more like you just have an inflated self-esteem. So an example question, I deserve the best things in life. Lastly, social dominance orientation. Many different studies have showed that high status groups are actually the most discriminatory towards out groups because they have high levels of SDO and high levels of in-group identification. An example question, some groups are just inferior to others. So let's tell you a little bit about our study. We had 456 people. They were recruited through Amazon's Mechanical Turk system. Ask me about this if you want to know more. We told them they would be compensated $1 for about an hour's worth of their time. It ended up averaging at about half an hour, and they were compensated $2 after debriefing. Our subject pool was limited to people within the U.S., so IP addresses from the U.S. only, and participants had to be 18 years of age or older. So first, participants completed scales of demographics, subjective socioeconomic status, and these other personality scales. This is the subjective socioeconomic status. This is a ladder. It's called the MacArthur ladder. PIF 2012 used it. So you rank yourself on this ladder compared to where you think you stand at your life at this moment compared to everyone else in the U.S. And then you also do it compared to those in your community, with the top being those with the most money, the best jobs, etc. So from there, participants completed honesty measures that we created. These were anagrams and number matrices. They ranged in difficulty, and they were presented in both normal and CAPTCHA text. So participants had 10 seconds to solve this 16 numbers, find two numbers within there that added up to 10. Now when participants solved we started off with just 4 numbers and went up to 16. If participants reported that they were able to solve these more difficult ones more often than the easier ones, then they were marked as cheating. Finally, participants rolled a virtual die that was rigged to only roll a certain amount, a number of times, and reported their total score. So these are very preliminary results. We're still double checking everything, so I don't have any set final conclusions for you today, but when we looked at our privilege demographics after doing a principal component factor analysis, we were able to extract 2 variables. So the first one we are labeling as the factor social class background. The highest loading here, as you can see, are father education, mother education is another high loading one, and it's all just kind of the objective measures of socioeconomic status. Factor 2, the largest loading, are the 2 subjective ladders. So from there, we also found that white individuals had the highest scores overall for the factors of privilege, but these scores weren't high enough to, as you can see, white loads on to both of these factors a little bit, but it's not a super significant loader. So our correlational findings, which we actually just did yesterday, between privilege and cheating, and then also personality and cheating. So with privilege and cheating, we did get a statistically significant result. It's a very small correlation, but it is still there. It was the subjective socioeconomic status, so the ladders. Those were correlated with the dice cheating. And then for personality, we actually had a lot of different things that were highly correlated. Participants were put into one of 2 conditions. So back when we showed you the anagrams and the matrices, those participants were either in a money condition where they were told that the more correct answers, the more times they solved it, the closer they'd get to a threshold of unlocking a $1 bonus. The other condition was an intelligence condition where participants were told that these matrices and anagrams were measuring their intelligence. So for our money condition, we found that For the cheating on the anagrams and matrices, the most highly correlated were exploitative entitlement coming in at 0.27, grandiose narcissism coming in at 0.26, the psychological entitlement scale coming in at 0.25, and non-exploitative entitlement coming in at 0.23. And the largest predictor for being honest, so the least likely to cheat, were those high in the Hexaco scale of honesty and humility. Lastly, in condition 2, we saw exploitative entitlement with a high correlation and the psychological entitlement scale. So my acknowledgements, just want to thank my thesis advisor and my other Honors College peers for all of their wonderful help, and the OURI for funding this research. Thank you, and do you have any questions?
Two types of narcissism that you mentioned, the second type, the invulnerable, or the
Vulnerable,
vulnerable,
yeah.
Was there something that related that to cheating as
Well,
well?
what we thought we would see was in the intelligence condition. We hope that vulnerable narcissists would cheat more in that than in the money one, because if they're thinking they're overcompensating, like, oh, this is going to show I'm intelligent if I say yes to this, they're more likely to fall into that scenario than the grandiose narcissists that are more concerned with money initiatives or other things like that.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the mechanical Turk system?
Yes, okay, so Amazon Mechanical Turk is this online system that Amazon created a few years back. It's in, I think it's in over 180 different countries with over 500,000 participants completing different, they're called HITs, so they're human intelligence tasks. These are either companies or psychological researchers that have come together and created online different surveys to answer. Companies, for example, would put together like a, go to my website, find the biography about me, and come back and tell me how long it how long it took you to do that and what you learned. So it's this really great system. People are compensated very low amounts because there is no set restrictions at this point. But I felt like our compensation was fair of $2 because had we done this in person, the most we would have paid somebody would have been a $5 gift card. And that would have been taking into account their travel time, their actual physically being here to do it. These people can do it anytime, anywhere, as long as they were in the US.
And do you think that the audience affiliated with the system had any impact at all?
I think it definitely had an impact. I think Amazon MTurk workers actually tend to be more honest, I would say, than the general population. I had many people from the MTurk system actually email me the day it was up saying things like, I think I completed the DICE task right, I really hope I added it up correctly, please still compensate me for this. They're used to going on and completing it and maybe getting paid, maybe not getting paid. If they understood that this was really psychological research, they would have understood that I had to pay them either way. So I think there was an effect and a decrease of our cheating behavior because of that. Along with, we actually had way more women than men, so that could have had a little bit of an influence. I forgot to mention, but being male did predict you were more likely to cheat in our money condition. And then lastly, we had way more white individuals than any other race. We had about 380 white individuals in the rest of other races. So those things definitely did skew the results a bit.
Before we thank the speaker, I'd like to present for this certificate. Lauren was awarded the first place oral presentation last week at the Undergraduate Research Symposium at Boca. And so it's my honor to hand this over to her. So let's thank the speaker.